You know, one of the most challenging roles that a GM takes on when they're creating their own homebrewed world is to give the NPC voices. Because any, creature or humanoid or whatever that can communicate with the players is going to have some kind of voice. And if you want to maintain some verisimilitude, those vocalizations should be distinct. And the burden of creating, compelling and unique voices in D&D began in the earliest days, but I think it's a task that has become more pressing in recent years with the streaming of D&D games online, in which you have players and GMs who are professional voice actors who are trained, in characterization and voice techniques. Players who come to the game from watching these channels may have an unrealistic expectations about what kind of voices a GM is going to do. But as always, I am here to help you. I'm going to provide you with 4 keys to creating unique and persuasive voices for your NPCs and creatures that doesn't require, training at some acting school. So as the big bad villain usually says to the players right before the final confrontation, now it begins! Hi all, KR King here, helping one and all homebrew their own D&D campaigns. So at the outset, I might answer a question I sometimes hear, which is, as a GM, do you really need to create unique voices and whatnot for your NPCs and monsters? And I would say technically no, but you're kind of doing your world a disservice. You're kind of taking away that immersive character that in part is what makes a world so interesting when you don't do any voices. Now, I have run in campaigns in which the GM and the players didn't use any voices. We talked in our ordinary voice when communicating. These tended to be more wargamey type campaigns in which battles were a big part of it. And of course, when you have battles, the time for talk is over. If you did have persuasions or skill checks or anything that required vocalization, we just rolled for these. And the thing is, if you've got a very skillful GM who can create a world, talk about stuff while using just his or her ordinary voice, the players also are skillful, it can be fun, but I think it's not the same as when you are immersed in a world in which the personages of that world, whether they are, the local tavern keep or the red dragon, have a distinct voice. So as always, with my advice in terms of running a D&D campaign, keeping it simple is the key. I'm just going to talk about 4 basic qualities of doing voices, which are tonality, emotion, pacing, and vocabulary. But notice there I didn't say accent, because I think that unless you're a very skilled, voice actor or someone who can do an accent believably and maintain it, I would avoid them. Because, a lot of times people will try to do the recognizable sort of British accent that we see in fantasy films, but it's not really good. It sort of seems laughable. Just doesn't work. The thing about trying to do an accent is it can be a pain in the ass to maintain. If it seems silly, it puts your world in that kind of silly factor. And the final thing is, you may offend someone. And if you're determined to do an accent of some kind, do the old James Bond villain accent, which was sort of, an undefinable, European, sort of an amalgamate of various European accents. Welcome to my complex, Mr. Bond. As you can see, I designed everything under this extinct volcano, from the nuclear reactor to the uniforms to the tableware. Right? It doesn't, it's sort of like, remember the villain in the first Die Hard movie, Hans Gruber, that was supposed to be German, but in fact he was played by an English actor speaking in his native language with a sort of indeterminate German accent.
Mr. Takagi, I'm really not interested in your computer. But I need the code key because I am interested in the $640 million in negotiable bearer bonds that you have locked in your vault. And the computer controls the vault.
And here's another thing. I played on an online game where the GM got one of those voice distorters or whatever on Discord. This was one example, so there may be better ones out there. I just didn't think it worked. I thought it was just like, now my voice is going through some kind of filter. And it didn't take into the account the things I'm going to talk about in terms of, what real people, how they talk, what things affect their speech. So we'll see how these four aspects can change, how individuals talk in such a way they become distinct. Let's start with tonal quality. And when I say tonal quality, I'm not talking about the sort of thing you get with some intense computer alteration of a voice. Basically, I'm talking about the pitch, high or low, and the quality from, guttural to very airy and light. So an obvious qualifier that we think of for pitch in an NPC or any creature is the size of the creature. A giant's going to have a lower voice, and a pixie's going to be talking up here. Now, for me, a lower voice is easier to do. My natural voice is on the lower side of the spectrum, so I'll have a tendency not to do higher pitched voices like this because it seems silly. But what you can do is, in terms of, let's say, emotion or pacing or whatever, I can lower the pixie's voice, because what is it about a pixie? They're shy, they're sort of furtive. What are you doing here? Why are you here? It doesn't have to be up here. It can just be... And again, as you can see, I'm not a great voice person, but I'm just trying to use those techniques to make it different. And it isn't size, because think about a sprite, which is the same size as a pixie, but it's described as very assertive, protective, it's aggressive. So even though maybe it's up here, it's going to be speaking in, why are you in my woods? What are you doing here? You must leave immediately. This sort of thing. The emotion and the pacing is going to be quick, because when people are angry, it quickens. Another thing you can do when you're thinking of size and pitch is to go against type. What does an aboleth's voice sound like when it's speaking telepathically in your head? Its ordinary voice is deep speech, but it just can communicate with you that way. Because they say it can discover your most secret desires and use them against you, so clearly it is communicating with you. The easy choice for an aboleth is something like, "No, you are my slave," low, guttural, aggressive, angry. But what if it's, again, it's trying to convince you, use this against you. What if it talks sort of like, well, this is what you've always wanted, or slows it down. This is what you've always wanted. I'm going to help you, right? Because a therapist or something isn't going to go, "No, I'm going to tell you what you got to do." They don't do that. Or again, the polite evil genius that says, "I'm curious as to why you have stumbled into my lair. Please explain to me what you want." So again, with pitch, you can go either with, what we think of as a stereotype just because it's easy, or against it. So let's say you have a construct that's been given the power of speech, magically. Maybe it's like a machine, "You will not enter this room, please leave." No emotion, the pacing is very halting. The pitch is in a machine-like tenor with very little variation, but, it doesn't have to be. The construct could say, "You should not be here. Please leave." And the nice thing about switching it up for something like this is the players can get cocky for when they hear a voice that's pleasing or doesn't really seem threatening, they can enter when they should. And then you think of the variety among creatures that speak common, a lot of the humanoids, ogres, orcs, hobgoblins, and whatnot. We tend to give them the low, gravelly voice. Perhaps it's because watching the Lord of the Rings orcs, "We have the taste for man flesh." But, in fact, if you watch the movie carefully, there are many different speech patterns in terms of the quality of the voice, the pitch and whatnot in the film.
"I'm starving. We ain't had nothing but maggoty bread for 3 stinking days.
Why can't we have some meat?"
Ooh, they look tasty. Get back, scum! The prisoners go to Solomon, alive and unspoiled.
Now, obviously, this is from the traditional orcs and the Uruk-hai, and then why did they do that? To give the orcs distinct personalities. And what you'll find is if you give the characters running into an orc or some humanoid when they think how their speech pattern should be, and you change it up a little, again, it throws them off, or maybe they think it's a trick or an illusion or something, or maybe they just discover, wow, in this world, creatures have, individual characteristics. It makes it seem more real. And for something like lycanthropes, let's say, you can think about the monster that the lycanthrope assumes. A werebear will talk like this, whereas, a little were-rat kind of talks like this, high-pitched, fast-paced, sneaky. And I sometimes think of were-tigers as being very sophisticated in their speech. They're sort of the lords of the, were-creatures. Now, obviously, creatures like giants, most of them just speak giant So the only way you're going to communicate with them, someone knows giant or some similar language that's associated. But again, we think of hill giants as just grumpy, loud, I'm going to kill you, that kind of thing. Their vocabulary is just, there is food, kill it. Or if they're really mad, there is food over there, let's go get it. The pacing increases. So I think of, the fire or stone giants as a little more intelligent, more vocabulary. Then you get to the cloud giant, it's neutral. It's more contemplative. It may speak like this. Why are you here? What is going on? Or why are you here? What is going on? Right? But you don't have to have some accent or something. Just that, the pacing, the vocalization, and the vocabulary. And then you have the storm giant, this Olympian creature. Maybe it speaks, with this distant, contemplative voice. Unless it's angry. And then the thunderbolts. Dragons are similar. You think of the white and black dragons as being, guttural, coarse, not a super high vocabulary. They're always grumpy. You get into the green dragon is very tricky. Maybe it has a mellifluous more voice that it's talking to the characters. The blue dragon, of course, is arrogant, but it's susceptible to flattery. Maybe it even falls for this sort of thing. And the red and the gold, they're super smart. How would they speak if they chose to lowly humanoids? Perhaps to convince them, perhaps to be friendly. Pacing is really important. We think of people increasing the speed of their talk when they get really mad and they're just really frustrated by this. Why is this happening, right? But in fact, powerful figures, the mob boss, the dictator, whatever. Khrushchev used to say everyone got nervous when Stalin started smiling and laughing, right? The big, powerful person, when he's angry, may slow down and speak more softly. I'm very disappointed in what you've done. And now I'm going to have to rectify that. And everyone around is going to listen carefully, right? And pacing can be used as a sign of intelligence. A smart, thoughtful person, weighs their words carefully. Whereas, as I said, the sniveler or the person trying to distract you or fool you may talk like this, really fast because I just want you to look. All I want you to know is I have nothing to do with what you're talking about. That kind of thing. So obviously vocalization can be tricky when you are crossing genders. With my voice timbre, I am not going to ever be very convincing as a female voice. But the thing is, you don't really have to raise or lower your pitch unnaturally to cross gender in vocalization. So suppose the group goes to meet the king and queen at the city's central keep after they've done some mission. And the king is gregarious and loud, and he welcomes these men and have, food and ale and enjoy yourself. And the queen, in that same pitch, talks more slowly, more deliberately, as she looks at the players and she says to the wizard, what is that elaborately carved staff you're carrying? It seems familiar to me. Where did you get it? And of course, you can mix this up. You could have, warrior queen who talks like this and is very forceful. And she is the one that's sort of in charge. And the king is a philosopher king, careful with his words. Maybe he brings that pitch, at a certain level and slows things down when he talks to the players. The other thing that you can always do is to mimic classical cues that we have in terms of gender without having to create, a straining and unnatural voice. So, a classical feminine creature, the hag, when you come in, you can do the witch-type voice. Oh, excellent, you've entered my lair. It doesn't have to be, how good was that? But, she can just be angry. How dare you enter my lair? Or, how dare you enter my lair? A little bit higher pitch. Or the evil-friendly, excellent, I have dinner guests. And again, these gender things can apply to, harpies or gynosphinxes or androsphinxes, wherever you're welding creatures with some kind of distinct, gender form. So the final tool, which is vocabulary, can also be a very powerful tool to creating individuated voices without having to worry about your skills in terms of, vocalizations, accents, and whatnot. Because the vocabulary of a creature tells us so much about them. It can be very simple. Suppose you're doing a communicate with plants and you're talking with a weed, or, a swarm of cranium rats is, communicating telepathically. It's going to be a very simple vocabulary. And obviously, when we think of a high-level genius character or creature, this is going to be marked by an elaborate vocabulary. But you know what? The background can also make a difference in a NPC or creature's vocabulary. So let's say you have a barkeep, in some crude tavern, and you have a valet of some noble. Both have the same level of intelligence, but they've been raised in a very different environment. It's their vocabulary that will reflect that. So the barkeep says, "What you mugs want to drink anyway?" And the valet, same pitch, same speed, same emotion. "What would the gentleman like to partake in? Wine or ale?" Now, I slowed the pace down there a little bit. The barkeep's in a hurry. The valet lives in a world of exaggerated politeness, but still, same basic sound. And you want to go against type. If the characters run into a soft-spoken orc who speaks with a very high and impressive vocabulary, is wondering why the players have wandered into their territory. What's going on? What's happening here? There's something wrong. Why? Well, there's nothing wrong, because why can't orcs have different vocalizations, different vocal patterns, different backgrounds? And you think about when you speak with the dead and they're speaking to you, our tendency is to have them talk like they're dead, and often halting speech, and often people will limit their vocabulary. Here's the thing. They would have the vocabulary they had in life. If it's a noble, if it's a person of a high class, whatever, or high intelligence, give them a good vocabulary. You can have, a monotone pitch kind of thing, no emotion, that sort of thing. But the vocabulary will make that dead person interesting and individual. So here's the thing. If you use those 4 categories I mentioned, tonality, emotion, pacing, and vocabulary, you could, almost limitless different combinations where you can create distinct voices without having to worry about your skill, at accents or maintaining them. So if you like what you've seen, please subscribe to my channel. I'm always looking for more. Love to hear your comments, and I always answer them. But most importantly, my friends, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.